Okay, what's up? We're live. It's the Seaside Live Show, and I'm bringing you the sea. So this is this is a special event that happens whenever my car is being serviced. As I end up having to come into town. Town's not very far from me, but it means that I get to find a beautiful location in Victoria to show you as our backdrop as we're doing the live show. And so this is the Pacific Ocean right behind us. You can maybe, I don't think you can see any oil tankers there, but there's a whole bunch of tankers that are parked right now. I think probably related to some work being done on some dock somewhere, some dockyard or something. But just behind me this way is Port Angeles, so that's Washington State, which is basically kind of southeast from where we live. And then in this direction, you can't quite see it, that would take you to sort of to in Vancouver's direction. It'd actually be a little further north than that. But so this is a place called Clover Point. I'm going to just lift up this phone so you can see down there, sort of. You can kind of see some cars behind that monument. And this is one of my favorite places to come hang out in Victoria by the ocean because it's just this big circular point. They've got a big amount of grass set out. And what we often get, because there's cliffs here that go down to the ocean, you get a lot of updrafts, and that makes it really good for paragliding. So you have a lot of people usually during the windier days floating around here in the sky. And then down here, you have a lot of people doing kite surfing, which I really want to try, as well as windsurfing, which I'm terrified of trying. And then for me, I'll just show you, I've got the most important accessory here, which is this guy right here, the one wheel. So I park my car, I hop on the one wheel, and I head into town, and I like to float a lot around this ocean because it's just so beautiful, and what an awesome way to spend the time. So I got a whole bunch of topics because you guys have been amazing. I went up online at about an hour before we started, and I said, hey, can you help me? Can you give me some ideas for topics? And I got a ton of awesome ones. So big thank you to everyone for supporting me and letting me be in this conversation with you. It kind of has to be a dialogue, even though the nature of a live is often that it's not. So I'm going to dive into a whole bunch of these. Before we do, let me check in and see what's been up for me this week, because I usually like to start that way. So a lot of what's been up for me this week has been, it's a bit annoying to share about because the theme hasn't changed. I kind of want to have like a new, different thing to share every week or something like that. But again, the theme has been very consistently releasing a lot of stuff. And so I've been in conversation with a whole bunch of people as of lately. This tends to happen, I find, in the arc of the work I do as a coach, is that there'll be like a period where a bunch of people just suddenly show up and are like, hey, can I have a conversation? I'd really like to talk to you about coaching. I think I might be interested in working with you. And then there's like a lull usually where like no one's reaching out. And so over the last month or so, I've had a bunch of people reach out and be like, oh, I'm super interested, or I listen to your podcast or whatever. And that's super cool. Love that. And now all of a sudden, like almost all of them have just vanished. And so this has been a bit of a theme over the last probably 2 months as I've been in conversation with people. It's been a beautiful conversation. We've really created a lot of possibility, and they're kind of like, I'd love to know more. I really want to make this work or whatever. We have that conversation. I tell them what the commitment looks like. They're a little bit nervous. They're like, but let's like, let me sit with this and let's follow up. And then I don't hear from them at all. And so I've been sitting with that from a few ways. One is just seeing it as an opportunity to practice like surrendering that, really letting them go with goodwill. Like, hey, thank you for the work. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I might not even be saying this to them because they're disappearing. I might just be getting to this place in my body where I'm just like, thank you for that work. I really enjoyed the conversation with you. God bless, peace be with you. I'm also looking at it through the lens of like, hey, is there anything for me to learn in this? Like, is it possible, hey, Andy, is it possible maybe I'm neglecting to present something for them? For example, anytime we open up the door to possibility in someone's life, which is to say we open up the door to the fact that there might be the possibility of their life being totally different than the one they've resigned themselves to. That means someone for the first time in their life may be saying like, oh my God, I could actually work 10 hours less and make twice as much money. That's a crazy possibility. And as soon as we open up that door, sure enough, without any doubt, I can tell you as like a law of the universe, there's going to be an equal and opposite amount of fear that shows up. And so it's possible like, oh, I'm not doing a particularly good job presencing that, getting them present to that, so that when they move on, when we hang up the phone this time, there's probably going to be a bunch of fear that shows up. And how do they want to be about that? And what's going to support them to stay in this conversation with me? Not so that I can move them to saying yes, but rather so that I can continue to support them to make a decision that's not based in fear. Even if that decision's a no, making it like a really clean, sober decision to be a no instead of a fear-based one. So that might be something that's showing up. But a lot of it I'm noticing, at least on this side, never mind what there's to do over there, is a lot of trust, a lot of surrender, a lot of like letting that happen enough times. And usually my experience, this is cold comfort in the moment. Because in the moment I'm like, I want a client. I want a new client. I want to win. But the sort of thing I know on some level, and I keep practicing empowering, is that there's usually a period where this happens a bunch, where I eventually surrender any conceit that there might be someone new, and I can just show up with people free of any expectation that anything happens, and that's usually where I get hired a bunch. That's kind of the way it goes. So that's a big theme. Another theme, I bought some mustache wax, which is great because it allows me to get my mustache out of my mouth, and I can kind of curl my mustache, which is very fun, except this side likes to curl way more than this side. So I'm trying to train these whiskers. Come on, brah. Train properly. So there's that. And he says, I sometimes push them to say no early on the call. Yeah, that can be really powerful. Like getting people to the point where it's like, hey, well, the stand I have, the belief and stand and experience I have is that holding loops open costs us something. And so it's not that I'm trying to like push them to get somewhere, but rather like, hey, it would be of service to someone to get them to a clear yes or no. And so let's just do that now, rather than have this sit in your mind and have this be like a thing where you're like, I kind of want to do it, but I don't really, but now what do I do about that? And that just eats away at people's brains. We can serve them by bringing them to a yes or no. So sometimes I'll do that too, Andy. And Andrew, you're saying at least it's a phase. Hey, Andrew, that is the story of my life in coaching. Totally relatable, especially on the part of highlighting the fear that could come up after the conversation and normalizing that for them. Yeah. Yes, indeed. So that's been kind of the context of life for me over the last couple of weeks. Let's go to some of our topics. So the first one I want to come to what David and Seth gave me a couple of weeks ago. David says, Adam, can you speak to the line between understanding why we feel the way we do, distinguish things to understand before we move forward, and simply feeling and letting go of the need to make sense of it? So let's talk about that through the lens of, sorry, before I go there, I'm just going to read to what you said, Andy, a little nuance. Andy says, I'd like to basically get clarity that they really don't want help, validation. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the no, part of the yes, is sometimes one of the places people can get caught is sort of having this story like, I should get coaching or I should want this, but in truth, they actually don't. And we can serve them in those instances by reflecting, helping them see, oh, you're saying one thing, but you're actually being a different thing. And if you're trying to convince yourself or trying to pretend or saying that you want coaching, but what's actually true for you is you don't, it's a tremendous service to provide to someone to be like, hey, you actually don't want this, and that's okay. You don't want this, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, the more you can just own that truth as your truth, the better, because then you're not trying to pretend you're something you're not. And this is one of the biggest things in the way of people's transformation, I find, is that the starting point where most people come is that they don't actually want transformation. They don't actually want to have to walk through the fire to have things go different. Instead, They're just telling themselves, they're like, I should have things be different. I should want them to be different. But in truth, they don't actually want to do what it takes. And if they can begin from the place of like, I am actually not willing to do what it takes to have things go differently, they can start there. Then they can start to work with that and start to release that. And only from that place can they then make a different choice. So when we come to terms with like our truth that way, as Andy's inviting, it actually moves us forward, ironically, by like getting us clear that we don't want to move forward. That's the first step to moving forward. That's pretty funny. Okay, so back to what David had asked. Talk about the distinction between understanding the way we feel, distinguishing, versus how do we like when it's just to feel and be with what's there. So regarding feelings as a starting point. Hey, Benny, I miss you. Keep coming down to Costa Rica, hoping to see you. Regarding feelings, the first thing about our feelings is that we as humans, we seek rationality. This is the realm of the mind. Because if we can understand our feelings, if we can understand what's happening, then in theory we can predict about it. We can predict what's going to happen, and then we can get out in front of it and make sure that we're not going to be in trouble. So understanding is very compelling to the mind, to our fear, to our ego, the thing designed to protect us. I'm going to talk about both those things, Benny. I'm going to talk the hell out of those things. So the mind really wants to understand our feelings. And regarding feelings, it all that does is create distance between what we're feeling and the act of feeling it. So if I'm sad, and maybe you've had this experience, all of you, the first thing that happens for me is I go, yeah, why am I sad? What am I so sad about? And I start to question it, and I create this entire dissertation on what even is sadness? And I get really engrossed in that. And what that does is it moves me out of the realm where I can feel this. Hey, Monica, nice to see you. Out of the realm where I can actually feel this, up into the mind where I can think about this. And so where we end up is thinking about how we feel rather than feeling how we feel. And that's really nice and safe, because if I'm thinking about how I feel, there's like there's a buffer between actually feeling it and where I happen to be. And if you have a relationship to whatever you're feeling, like let's say sadness, that sadness is weak, or sadness is pathetic, or sadness is fine for those people, but I don't get sad, or whatever your story is, your disempowered relationship to sadness, then creating distance between you and what you don't want to feel is going to be comforting. It's going to make the sadness less scary. At least you're a little bit removed from it. The trouble with this is that it stops us from actually feeling what's there to be felt. And so that thing can never resolve itself. It can never move on. We can never allow it to be experienced so that then it can move on and the next thing that's there to be experienced can get addressed. Hey, Alex. And so regarding feelings, we don't really want to do a lot of work usually distinguishing it. We don't want to do a lot of work thinking about it. Usually for most people, I find the best thing to do is to just feel what you're feeling. That's the first step. So at this point, we've talked about one side, and there's always two sides to the coin, or the pendulum. So for a lot of people like me, who tend to be very thinky, very mind-oriented people, we think a lot about our feelings, and that creates distance from them, and then we don't have to feel them. And the path there might be like, hey, just feel them. Just feel sad. But there's a flip side. The flip side is where what happens with feelings is that we feel them, but we are kind of flooded with them. We're washed out to sea in the tide of our feelings. There's a fuck ton of birds losing their minds just offshore that way. I don't know what's going on. Seagulls losing their goddamn mind. It's cool. I wish you could hear them, but my microphone's good at catching this. Hello, fine Sir Daniel. Arise, Sir Daniel. So on this other side, we're talking about feelings here. We're talking about on the one side, there's those of us that think about our feelings. And on this other side, there's those of us that are washed out to sea in the tide or the flood of our emotions. And the medicine for these people is also just feel your feelings. And that sounds confusing because it's like, but I am Adam and I'm washed out. I'm flooded. I have no capacity. I lose my own sovereignty in the face of the strength of my emotions. What's actually happening, almost certainly, is instead you're on the other side of the spectrum. You also have a story about your sadness, and you get lost. You're not only just feeling your feelings, you are feeling your feelings, plus you have all of this story that continues to add to them and to layer on layers. Hey, Monica Deuce or B. So it's not just I'm feeling sad, and so I'm just going to feel sad. It's I'm feeling sad, and my sadness means this, and like, oh my God, those people in Russia or the Ukraine, and that is going to lead to that, and now I'm in my stories, but I've also woven into my stories layer upon layer of meaning and story. Hey, Tommy, and so that cascades the sadness. Instead of simply feeling what I'm feeling and allowing myself to just be sad, I am sad plus story, and then so on and so on and so forth. It becomes overwhelming. It becomes endless. And so for both of these sides, really the work is just feel what's there to be felt. And notice when your thoughts are getting there and practice setting them down, coming to your breath, and then feeling again. And so one of the practices I like that really supports me with this, I often do it when I'm meditating in my morning practice, because that's the time when I'm actually committed to sitting still, and I'll sit and then I'll simply ask myself, what am I feeling in this moment? And I won't think too hard on that. I'm not like, trying to push my fingers through my brain. What am I feeling? What am I feeling? And sometimes what I'm feeling will be like my shoulders feel a bit heavy, or I feel vibrating feeling in my arms. And sometimes an emotion comes forward. Oh, I'm feeling tight in my chest, or I'm feeling frustrated, or whatever. And then my practice is, okay, can I simply feel that? Can I let myself be with the feeling of frustration? And I can explore that further. Where do I feel that in my body? I feel it in the back of my, like between my shoulder blades. Okay, can I put attention on that feeling and just really notice it, really pay attention to it? And what this does as a practice is it trains us to distinguish, to discern, to separate our thoughts from how we're feeling, and to practice just being with our feeling. One of the things that gets in the way of this is and I think you might have just written about this, Monica. Monica says we can get into this trap of, I'll feel this now so that I can feel happier soon. Yes. And she said that only extends the sadness. So that's exactly what I was going to say. You beat me to the punch, you clever student, you. Is that we have this story like, okay, I don't like sadness, but I'm willing to feel it. And then this is my colloquialism for it, provided it will then fuck right off. I'll feel the sadness. I'm all right with feeling sad as long as it fucks off within an hour. Or we'll feel it. We're willing to like sit, but then we're like, it didn't move me forward. It didn't feel productive. I didn't get anything from it. I didn't get anywhere. And that's not really the point of feeling stuff. It's not, as soon as you're kind of willing to feel something in order to get somewhere, you're actually not willing to feel something. You're using it as a means to an end rather than the end unto itself. And the truth of the human condition is whatever you feel right now, that's the truth. And so it's sort of like, well, I don't want to feel my sadness because it feels bad. That's fine, but feeling bad and feeling sad are inextricable parts of the human experience. They are part of the abundance of life. And so the way I invite people to look at this is the way I look at it is a better way for me to say that. If what I am committed to is being fully open and fully experiencing the abundance of life, then the practice for me is to feel whatever there is for me to feel in this moment. And you will discover if you do that you'll feel something until it's fully felt, and then it'll move on and something new will show up. But the way that we make that work is we let go of any requirement, any expectation that something different shows up. It becomes, I'm sad in this moment, so I'm going to feel sad. Okay, what do I feel in this moment? Sad. Okay, I'm going to feel sad. How about now? Now I'm frustrated that the sadness is here. Okay, I'm going to feel frustrated. I'm going to let that frustration sit in here. And what happens, you'll find, is that you start to get to enjoy the roller coaster. Not always, because if you are always enjoying something, you're missing out on some of the bitterness of life. But what happens is that you become more willing to ride the roller coaster, and that allows you to stay open throughout more of it. And the more open we are, the better decisions we can make, the more fluid we can be with life, the more It becomes easier to navigate the ups and the downs, trying to reconnect to my live. Facebook just told me it's trying to reconnect. Hey, Seth, nice to see you, brother. Okay. What did Binny say she was? Binny specifically, I'm interested in hearing about sharing goals versus keeping them quiet and also keeping calm before big things. Great. Let's talk about, so Raf says, I'd love to hear you talk about sharing your goals versus keeping them private. So let me, I don't have water to drink or tea. I should have gotten a tea, but at least this way my bladder won't be exploding by the time we finish this live. So there's lots of kind of guidance or suggestions or input or whatever you want to call it, advice, tons of advice on what to do with all of this. I want to start by talking about the act of making a declaration, which is the word I'm going to use instead of goal, but you could probably interchange them. Declaration is a more specific definition that I'm going to use, which I think is a little more powerful. And then what happens once we do that and why speaking them publicly can support us. So a declaration is really simple. It's here's what I'm going to have done. Here's what I will be done with. Here's what I will do. And here's by when I will do it. So an example of a declaration would be, I will be wearing a new shirt by 12 p.m. tomorrow. Or I will have left my job by November 1st. Or I will have a new job by December 4th. Or I will move to Ireland. Actually, better would be like, I will have moved to Ireland by February 28th. 29th, that's the secret one, the way out. So the nice thing about a declaration is the clarity of it, the simplicity of it, and that it draws a clear line in the sand. We are highly resistant to this because we're like, well, I find when I make a declaration like that, I feel a ton of pressure and that doesn't feel good for me. And so what I've learned to do is just do experiments. Or when I make a goal like that, when I don't achieve it, I feel really horrible and I don't like that feeling. And so these days I just don't make goals like that. Or we have all kinds of like, we could call them workarounds. The trouble with the workaround is that the actual opportunity is for you to address your story, your relationship, your whatever that thing is that has you feel that way when you make a declaration, to break that up so that then you have the opportunity to make a declaration and not feel terrible about it. And the reason to do that is because that's what a leader does. A leader gives us a clear commitment that we can rely on. It doesn't mean that they make the commitment every time. It doesn't mean that they always do what they say that they're going to do. What they do is they let us know if they're not going to make that commitment. So I might make a declaration, hey, we're going to have this product out in 2 months by September 1st or October 1st, November 1st, whatever it happens to be. And then as we're going along, I realize we're not going to actually be able to honor that commitment. And so what I do as a leader is I reach out to the people that are relying on me and I tell them, hey, I'm not actually going to be able to make that commitment. Here's what got in the way. Here's what we can see, and here's what's next. And this is our next deadline that we're going to make. And let me get myself did I bring even a charger? Probably not. Classic Adam. I think I did. I might be able to plug it into my laptop here. Yes, I did. But I'm going to have to do a bit of work to make it fit in my phone. You guys don't mind this, right? This is all part of the fun. So I've got to raise this phone up just a touch, which it doesn't like doing. And I got to plug this cord in here. Okay. Whoa! I got to nearly dump my phone on the ground. That's an important part of this journey that we're on together today. Yeah, you get in there. This cord, we nearly knock over this transformer. We make this a show of what not to do when you're doing a live, and then we plug this over here into my laptop, and then yes, battery juice. Yes, trust this computer. Okay, there we go. And then let's put the light on my face. And then let's move this over here just a little bit so you get yeah, that's better. That's better lighting. So a declaration is a powerful thing. And all of the stuff, all of the reasons people have, here's why I don't like making declarations, they become workarounds. And that's what we do in life. So I feel a bunch of pressure when I make a declaration like that. So instead, I've decided to start doing things this way. And what that does is it shrinks your life down. Can you still see me, Daniel? I saw what you typed. It looks like I'm still here. It says live there. Let me know if you can still see me, or if we've vamoosed, in which case I'll have to restart. But it's weird because I can see me. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to keep talking until someone lets me know. So I don't like to do this because I feel this way. You don't have to feel that way, but what's happening is you've resigned yourself. You've resigned to the idea that anytime I use the tool of a declaration, I'm going to feel bad. Therefore, I'm never going to use the tool of declaration. Now I feel good. Okay, great. Monica, Tommy still see me. Instead, what we want to do is look at, why do you think that is? What's going on that has you feel bad? What's the story at play? Because if we can eliminate that story, if we can excavate that story and dissolve it, then you'll have access to this powerful tool of declaration without having to manage how you feel or feel bad or all of that stuff. Monica, the place I'm in is called Clover Point. This is the Pacific Ocean here. You're sort of in that direction, maybe a little further south, but right behind me is Port Angeles. Okay, so when we make a declaration, we've now got some stuff we have to do. And what is typical is a lot of us, especially if the declaration is towards something that is not already predictable for us to achieve. Like if I said, I declare after this live, I'm going to go get a coffee, I don't need any extra support to create that. There's no breakthrough required. There's no miracle needed for me to make that happen. I'm very reliable to go get a coffee after I finish this. Decaf because I'm not drinking caffeine, but you get the idea. More challenging is something like, I am going to have, I don't know, let's say I will have created 20 new clients by November 1st. That's unpredictable for me, especially the way I work with people. And so I'm going to need some support to make that happen. When we have a goal like that, when we have a declaration on the table like that, what's predictable is that we will not achieve it. And so we need some structure to support us. Otherwise, our resistance and all of the stuff in our life that's shaped such that it keeps our life going the way it predictably goes is going to just naturally nudge us towards, I didn't make it happen. And so telling people about your declaration, declaring them publicly, is a structure that can support you. When we announce our declaration, it kind of puts some accountability into the space, especially if you're like an influencer like me who has 9 viewers on his lives. Big time influencer here. If you want to sponsor this influencer, you let me know. Beard balm or something like that. But the point being, when you tell people this is what I'm taking on, and you do it like a declaration, as opposed to like a loose sort of, I have a goal one day to move to Ireland. That's not going to call you to task. But if you say, I am going to move to Ireland by this point, now you've got some visibility on you. You've got some accountability around you. And so that can be very powerful. It doesn't mean that it's going to magically make everything work for you. Structure will only work to the extent that you're willing to empower it. So I'll share a story about someone I worked with at one point. They were on a leadership team I was leading, and they made this declaration: I am going to do this by this date. And they set up some really great structure to hold them, to hold their feet to the fire. They said, if I do not, I will donate to this particular political party who I cannot stand. And so the date was coming closer, and we were like, hey, how's it going? Moving forward? Yeah, it's moving along, it's coming along. And then we got to that point of declaration and sort of moved past it. She didn't mention anything. And so at our next meeting, we're like, hey, how'd it go? What's going on? And she was like, oh, yeah, I didn't achieve it. We're like, okay, great. So are you going to make that donation? And she said, no, I can't. They're just too horrible. So that's an example where someone's disempowering the structure that they created. And yeah, they're horrible, but that's the reason, the reason to make that payment anyhow is so that we learn to develop power behind our word. I'm going to use this horrible political party that I cannot stand to develop, I'm going to use them for the force of good. I'm going to use them to develop power in my word. The reason being, I said I was going to do this, and so I'm going to do it. I said I was going to do that, or I said I was going to do this. And every time we say, I said I was going to do that thing, but it's too horrible, I can't be bothered, we become less trusting in our own word. It erodes the power of our own word. And so sharing your declarations publicly, I think it's fantastic. I think it's a really great structure. And it won't magically solve everything. It'll just provide you one more access to structure, one more piece. I want to see what you wrote here, Benny. Benny writes, I'm confused as some people say it's better to work in silence and then announce so that negative energies don't sabotage. And some people say share what you're doing, your goals publicly to get support. I can see both sides of that. Like I could see someone saying, when I share what I'm doing, people tell me it's a bad idea and then I get discouraged and then I don't take on what I'm going to do. And so in that case, like, don't share, just do it. And then after the fact, say you've done it. Personally, I think from my perspective, all of whatever's showing up in the moment is an opportunity for us to take on our work. And that's only available if we're actively getting supported. So if we're working with a coach, if we're working with plant medicine, if we're doing whatever, I'll come to your question in a sec, Monica. If we're in a situation where we're actively being supported, then stuff like I put this into the world and someone said something and now I feel discouraged is beautiful because it's a moment where we can take that to our structure of support and get supported with it. And we have to understand anytime you say you're going to do anything, there are going to be detractors. Anytime you put an original thought or opinion out into the world, there's going to be detractors. And so if what I do, if the way I'm being in my life is that I say, when I tell people about my goals, I hear detraction and then I shy away from my goals. So I'm not going to tell people about my goals. I'm also eliminating my capacity to tell people about other stuff that matters to me. So it starts to become like, I don't share my goals. I also don't share with people when I'm really in love with someone because they might start saying, well, but you were in love last time, Adam. And so I'm not going to share that. And I'm also not going to share about that promotion because what if someone starts to detract there and then I start to doubt the promotion? So I'm not going to tell them that. And sure enough, over time, I start to shrink more and more and more. Whereas if I can bring this to my coach, to my plant medicine, to my teachers, my whatever, then it becomes this beautiful opportunity to see, oh, here's a place where I'm shrinking. Here's a place where I lose my sovereignty. I share what I'm up to in the world. The world responds however the world is entitled to respond, but I make that meaningful. Coach, can you support me with this meaning I'm creating so that that no longer has to be in the space for me? And that's a really beautiful thing. So when we go silent, when we make ourselves invisible, we don't have to deal with as much as the world, but that's not really what life is about. That's not really what a fully expressed human being is doing. It's sort of like if you go into a cave and meditate there for 3 years, you can experience blissful peace, but that's not really what humans are for. We're social creatures. We're here to get into the world, to be with people, to impact other people, to let other people impact us. So I'm always going to advocate for people to lean into that thing rather than to contract away from it, to actually open themselves up to the very thing they think is problematic rather than to create these sort of tricks, these hacks in life where they don't have to be so much with them. Does that make sense, Benny? Am I speaking kind of to what you're saying? Monica, it's basically the same answer I have for experiments I've just given. So you say, what's wrong with experiments? Lots of people suggest experiments and taking swings to achieve goals. There's nothing wrong with anything. That's my hack. That's my doing a live hack, as you just say, there's nothing wrong with anything. And then you caveat it and prove why there's a lot wrong with it. So there's nothing wrong with an experiment. In the same sense that there's nothing wrong with staying silent about what you're up to. There's nothing wrong with trying to come up with a new term called a Glugenblacken. And when you do a Glugenblacken, you just think about the thing you want, and then you snap your fingers 3 times, and then you forget about it. And then sometimes suddenly you find yourself with that thing you want. Glugel and Blacken. It's the new hot thing. Tell all the influencers that this influencer is putting that out there. What I find gets missed with experiments, or what's happening more often than not, is that people have had a disempowered relationship with a declaration. Because they made a declaration, they did not achieve it, and then they made that very meaningful. The fact that they didn't achieve what they declared they were going to achieve, the fact that that's the way it went, they made a story about. And the story is, oh, I suck. Oh, I never do the things I say I'm going to do. Oh, I'm just not capable of making stuff happen. Oh, story. And then rather than go into that story and break it up, they make that story real. They make that story like, oh, that's the way it is when I make a declaration. So the story becomes attached to that declaration. And from there, they decide declarations are no good. So they take this powerful tool and they set it aside because they've concluded something based on their story about how it went. And they create a new version. I only do experiments. I take a swing, I see how it goes, and that's that. And so an experiment in and of itself is not bad. It's not wrong or dangerous. The thing that I find is problematic and holds people in place is more often than not, they're going to this idea of a thing called an experiment as a way to kind of alleviate the pain they feel from their story. So it's sort of like, there's nothing wrong with me concluding that I just want to spend a year by myself. But it becomes problematic if I'm making that conclusion because I have an internal belief that no one loves me and I'm tired of being rejected. In that instance, me spending that year is just going to reinforce that old story. It's just going to deepen that story and further find evidence and create evidence to prove that truth. And so often what's more powerful is to excavate the story, to go into it, rather than to create like sort of that life hack kind of thing where it's like, I've hacked away, now I have experiments, now I never have to feel bad, now, all of that sort of stuff. So that's where I would say the problem isn't the experiment itself, it's who we're being underneath that then has us reach for something called an experiment rather than continuing to work with the tool that's bringing us into confrontation with our story about ourselves. Whew, that's a mouthful. When I don't have tea, it's like a lot of stuff. All right, Raf, thank you for that question. It's a really awesome topic suggestion. Faison says, can you talk about calming your nervous system before big moments, meetings, occasions, honoring your fear versus crumbling to it by becoming an anxious mess in those big moments? Yes, I can. I'll do my best. So this is very similar to what we were talking about at the start about feeling our feelings versus like kind of thinking about them and doing all that stuff. So the fantasy that many of us have is I can do some kind of work, I can have some kind of conversation where I will then be able to go out and live a really big life and not feel any fear. If there's just some kind of conversation I can have, some kind of experience I can create, some kind of medicine I can drink, some kind of pill I can take, some kind of conversation I can have with some kind of coach or therapist or whatever, that upon having it, I will then be able to create the life of my dreams and I won't feel fear. Fear won't get in my way. My experience is that that's never the case. Your experience may vary. Maybe you've met someone where you're like, no, this person definitely feels A, super alive, and B, not at all afraid of anything. My experience is usually when I'm around those people, there's something that feels distrustful about them. There's something that feels kind of locked up. So when it comes to fear, there's two places that we tend to end up. And you've probably experienced both of these in people. The first one is the person insisting that they're not afraid while it's very clear they're afraid. This was a number of years back, but I was doing work with, I'd been brought in to like assist to co-lead basically, or to lead a thing for like a workshop that's being done for a bunch of executives. And I was going, and then this other guy was going, and this other guy was someone who I would say projects a lot of confidence. And I'm intentional about that wording. He projects a lot of confidence. There's a lot of like, I'm confident kind of being projected to you. And while we were sort of sitting at the back waiting for things to happen, he was pacing, he was checking the temperature in the room. He was like, his energy was up, he couldn't sit still. And I was like, hey man, how you doing? He was like, totally great, super excited. And I was like, okay. And, nervous at all? No, not at all. I do this all the time. And it was just so palpable how nervous he was. It was so palpable, whilst he's insisting he's not. That, by the way, is the biggest, most problematic place, is that we, as humans, get to this place where we're feeling something, who we're being is one thing, but we're insisting we're not. And that's where we get stuck in our lives. Because if you're insisting you're not something, while simultaneously you actually are that something, you're never going to be able to do anything about this. If I'm insisting that I'm not harming myself, and then I keep punching myself in the chin, it's going to be hard for me to get support for my headaches. Because the thing to do is to stop punching myself, but I'm insistent that that's not the case. I'm kind of going to be stuck with chin pain. So this is an example where this person is like insistent that they're not feeling fear. So that's one side of this equation, is where we're going in and we're like, I don't feel fear, or we're actively trying to tell ourselves I don't need to feel fear, or I shouldn't feel fear, or blah, blah, blah. The other side is where we're just like awash in the fear and can't find our footing and are like, I'm terrified, and we make our fear super meaningful. And like we go to people and we're like, I'm really afraid, as though there's something that is special or particular or interesting even about that fear. And the way we want to practice coming to be with this, the way we want to stand with this, is kind of like this. I'm afraid. Like, so fucking what is kind of the attitude. Not so fucking what, so then my fear will go away. Like, so fucking what, I'm afraid, no big deal. Now fuck off, please, fear. That's not how it's going to work. It's more just like, okay, I'm afraid. Like, that's it. There's no significance to me being afraid beyond that I'm afraid. Just like if you were eating a good meal and you were enjoying the taste of it, you're not like you're not calling up your best friend and being like, oh my God, I'm eating broccoli that's been steamed and it's really good, and what should I do about that? That would be a weird thing. It'd be funny, and if you do that, please tell me about it so I can enjoy that. But that'd be a weird thing to do. And yet with our fear, we make it significant. We attach all this added significance, like, I got to tell him about it. No, you don't. All you got to do is kind of like acknowledge that your fear's there. Okay, I'm afraid. So that's the first thing that we can do when we're feeling afraid, nervous, scared before whatever it is that we're up to do. Literally every year, we just launched the Forge, again, the program Bay and I lead. Literally every year before we launch it, I'm afraid. And my fear shows up like fear, but also like apathy, like disinterest, like a lack of inspiration. And my work every time is just to sort of be like, here it is again. Still feels crappy. Doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything other than that I'm afraid. And so we really want to practice taking on that attitude with our own fear. Shit ain't that deep. You're just here, fear. That's cool. Hello. You're not going to go away. Just because I know that you don't mean that much doesn't mean you're going to go away. But I can at least acknowledge that's all you are. You're just fear. So that's the first thing that we can do. Don't try to pretend it's not there, because that means it's significant. Right? That would be like if I was enjoying this meal, but I was actively like, don't enjoy this. I'm not enjoying this meal. That's weird. Our fear is just a good tasting meal. We don't have to make it significant, but we also don't have to try to convince ourselves that we're not enjoying it. The second thing that we can do is always anchor back into our breath. So every single time you give yourself depth of breath, every single time you breathe deeply into your belly and then into your chest, and then out of your chest and out of your belly, you are in the practice of the most fundamental act of self-love, giving your body the breath that it needs moment by moment. And what that does is it allows you to get out of your head, and it allows you to get embodied. The breath is the fastest way to embody yourself. And in your body, you get free of your thoughts, and your thoughts are meaning making. They create significance. So when you breathe, you're going to get present to the fear in your body, and then your thoughts are going to want to kick back up. But if you keep putting attention back on your breath, it just lets you anchor into the present moment. And so as we do that, the fear can kind of just be there. And we're like, all there is for me to do is breathe in this moment. And then sure enough, your thoughts are probably going to be like, yeah, but come over here with me. And like, oh my God, what if someone in the audience thinks you're a dorkwad? And then it's like, you're going to get caught in that for a bit. And then you remember, oh, right, how's my breath? Okay, let's breathe. Sadly, that's really all there is to do in these moments, is distinguish our fear simply as that. Oh, it's just fear. Doesn't mean the fear will become lovely to feel. It doesn't mean that the fear will go away. It doesn't mean that the fear will suddenly be a unicorn riding on a rainbow. It just means the fear is there, and all it is fear. I don't have to do anything with it. I don't have to push it down. I don't have to make it more meaningful. It's just acknowledging its fear. And then second is anchor into our breath, get embodied. Yeah, these seagulls are crazy, crazy. I was over at a different spot to start us off today, and then like a bunch of people showed up and started feeding bread to the seagulls. And I've lived in Victoria long enough around these amazing birds that are some of the only birds that can poo mid-flight. And I know that when someone starts to feed a bunch of bread, soon there is poo to follow. Their metabolism is quick when it comes to pooing on people. So, okay, Maria Simonetti said, can you talk about resilience? Well, Maria, I would bloody love to. And now I'm going to. So resilience, sometimes also called grit. Sometimes people distinguish the two. Hey, Rachel. Resilience is the capacity in the midst of typically like traumatic events. And by traumatic, I mean, we can be talking capital T trauma or lowercase t trauma. Just for reference, capital T trauma would be the stuff that historically we like trauma, like PTSD from being in active duty in the war, or sexual abuse, or like violence at the house from an alcoholic parent, like big trauma we know. But lowercase t trauma is also traumatic, and lowercase t trauma is anything along this spectrum of stuff that's traumatic that leaves us feeling unsafe. And so lowercase t trauma can be like you as a child were held by loving parents, but you cried because you needed something and your mom turned away from you and got busy doing something else. That can be traumatic. I'm not saying it's exactly the same as the other form of trauma. They're gradients, of course. But they are all traumatic along the spectrum. And what matters is not whether your trauma is greater than mine. What matters is what was traumatic to me was traumatic to me. And what was traumatic to you was traumatic to you. And there might be heavier lifting to move a particular kind of trauma, but that's irrelevant. We want to get away from the idea of comparing and really only look like, what does this person right here need to heal? And if I'm supporting someone, what does this person need? Rather than like, well, you don't understand trauma because yours wasn't like, don't do that. It disempowers you and the other person. So resilience is kind of like someone's ability to survive through the trauma, as opposed to being shattered and destroyed. So when we think of like resilience, we kind of, that word was used a lot with my wife, who was raised in like really, really challenging circumstances, lots of upheaval, lots of unrest, blah, 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 blah. It's her story, so I won't go too much into it. But it's her ability to like kind of come back after something like this happened and like continue to operate as a human and to be fine and to survive and all of that sort of stuff. So that's the fundamental idea of resilience. Rachel shares something here that I think is important, which she says, trauma is not about what happened, it's about whether it exceeded our capacity to manage it. And the other thing that I've heard from a friend of mine, John Jacob Mubarak, who's worth following. If you don't follow John Jacob, he's an awesome dude, super hilarious. The guy's like a big cartoon character, great coach. He says, trauma is not what happened, it's our story about what happened. That's what creates the trauma. So anyhow, all of these are different ways of relating to it. The thing that is important here is that all of us experience trauma to some extent, and resilience is our capacity to kind of like allow for that to happen and continue to hold on to ourselves. My experience is that people who experience a lot of trauma have to either develop a lot of resilience, or they tend to be like just crumbled. They tend to be like almost destroyed, like just they fall to pieces underneath it, which is unfortunate and sad and requires support and blah, blah, blah. But that's okay. I'm not talking about those people. We're talking about the people that are really resilient. And what resilience breeds in people is this incredible capacity to survive, to like, no matter how like much you come at them, they become very good at like, I can hold the line. I can stay here. I can survive in this situation. So this is so important, especially as we're aging, because otherwise we break and then we're just like, we can't really function. We lose the capacity to even function as a human. And so resilience is really important at this point. However, resilience becomes a challenge. I'm searching for the right word. A challenge when we start to want to get into transformational work. Because transformational work is about letting go of survival. Transformational work is about ego death. Transformational work is about surrender. And surrender and ego death are the antithesis of survival. When I'm surviving, I am holding on. I am resolutely and with great strength holding on to things as they are so that I can continue to have them go as they are. So people with a great deal of resilience tend to be like plucky. They're very like, they have a lot of grit. They're able to like, you are not going to change me, which is awesome. But it's interesting, Monica, what you said. I'm going to come to that. I think what I might be saying is actually the opposite, but I'm not totally sure. We'll see when I come to speak to that. If you are incredibly resilient, it becomes very hard to let go in those moments when what's being asked of us is to like really let a part of ourselves die. And so you might imagine like a caterpillar who got bombarded when it was a little caterpillar, and it learned to get very strong at like fighting and surviving, and it became very good. And then what happens is it comes to the moment of the chrysalis, and it becomes cocooned, and it's time to become the butterfly. And what happens in the cocoon during this period of transformation is the caterpillar's DNA, its cells start to die, and these cells called ideation cells start to become butterfly cells. And as those butterfly cells are being created, the dying caterpillar's immune system kills them. It attacks and kills them. And so that's fascinating, and it's a great metaphor for the way transformation works. Like this new version of self is being built, but the old version is hanging on for dear life, and it is attacking what it doesn't know, what it doesn't understand. And so the greater your resilience, the more resilient you are, the better you are at attacking that new stuff, the better you are at hanging on to what you knew. And that can become a real challenge when it's time to transform, because transformation is about letting the old die so that the new can come into place. And so we don't want to like vilify resilience. We don't want to make it wrong. We don't want to make it bad. We don't want to suggest that some people are better than other people because they're more or less resilient or anything along those lines. But the more you had to learn to survive to get here, the more your work might entail learning how to let go of the survival. The more your work might entail letting go and learning how to surrender, because that's going to be one of those places where you're particularly geared up against surrender. Surrender was so unsafe when you were young that you've now got this sort of like almost hypervigilance or knee-jerk reaction or hair trigger towards like, hell no, I'm not going to do that. And so, Monica, coming back to what you said here, which is it seems resilience is what transforms trauma into a gift. There's so many, like, I could see on one hand how that could be the case. Like it allows trauma to be something you survive through. I would say resilience is more like what allows us to continue to survive as human beings. Like trauma is an incredible, resilience is this incredible strength, this determination that allows us to move through trauma. And Monica, you're saying you have a different definition of resilience, because to me surrender is resilience. Can you share more about that so that we can look at that? I'm interested to hear what you see there. Got some wasps showing up, some guêpes as they're called in French. What are you doing here, wasps? It might be because my beard right now smells of whiskey and of like cedar and other things. It's got some delicious smelling balm. They might be coming for that. I'm just going to let you type briefly, Monica. I'm going to talk about our countryside as you're doing so. So for those that joined a little bit late, this backdrop here is called Clover Point. And this is one of my favorite places in Victoria. This is almost right downtown. So downtown's just like, you could walk 15 minutes into town that way. And right this way is sort of the United States. That's where what's called Port Angeles, which was the setting for Twilight, was there. It's very foggy. And right now, with the mountains, you can see one of my favorite things about living on the coast. It's kind of hard with this resolution and stuff, but like I really love here along the ocean, we see a lot of stacked mountains. You can see mountains in the distance, and then like they're kind of fogged out with the marine fog and layer. So at the far back, you probably can't see it, but there's the Olympic mountain chain. Hurricane Ridge is there, which is a really beautiful set of mountains that we get to look at. And so often I bring my one wheel and I float along this whole waterway. That's all, we have a whole path that goes all the way along here. Cruise boats come in this way. It's really beautiful. So let's see what you wrote here, Monica. You say resilience is a different energy, but surrender is where the lesson gets absorbed, where the choice is available. And to me, that allows you to move forward in a clean way versus fighting resilience. Interesting. I guess I would say I have a different experience than yours, perhaps. And at least for me, my experience is that particularly resilient individuals struggle with surrender. And because surrender was so costly when they were growing up. Surrender was not something that was really available or on the table, because to surrender meant you were going to get physically harmed. To surrender meant you were going to get abused. To surrender meant you were going to get hurt violently. And so from that place, surrender actually becomes very, very dangerous. And the resilience is this form of like an armor ultimately, as opposed to like I can surrender into anything. So it's possible we just have a different definition for resilience, and I'm speaking to that definition. And if yours is different, that's all fine and good, but then it's just not the thing that I'm speaking to. Okay. Monica Begalem says, Adam, can you please talk about the being of a master certified coach beyond the ICF markers? Don't worry, guys. I'm going to speak to this, I hope, in such a way that it's not exclusive to coaches. And how do you reconcile transformational leadership with transformational or MCC coaching? So, and she says, MCC coaching seems to be non-directive completely. So what Monica's talking about, other Monica, not the one that has just been in the comments with us, Monica was just on a webinar that I was on yesterday with her, and I was kind of part of a panel where the person leading this webinar, this was the Essence of Mastery Summit. So some of you may have come, some of you may have seen me sharing about this when we were releasing it. We had a webinar yesterday, and the leader of this webinar, Annie Gelfand, is a delightful woman, was modeling Master Certified Coach, MCC coaching. So this is kind of the highest level of coaching that the ICF accredits. There's only about 1,500 of us that hold this certification. So it's kind of, you could call it like rarefied air, for better or for worse, and for worse. But the thing about coaching like this is that it's in a lot of ways very restrictive, and it's very, there's almost no leading at all. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about this idea of MCC coaching from the perspective of like what really creates transformation. And I want to talk about the shortfalls that I see in that. That's kind of the layout of what I want to talk about. Before I go there, I want to talk about the positives of accreditation, because that's very easily stepped over. And I find that is often stepped over by people that aren't going to get accredited anyhow. By which I mean People often criticize accreditation, and what they're really doing is justifying why they're not going to go through those hoops. So the benefits to accreditation are absolutely not that people are going to take you more seriously. No one gives a damn about your accreditation in this particular profession. It's not really going to make you necessarily get more clients. It's not going to make you more masterful in terms of the way you show up in the world. What it will do is it's going to take you through a process that's going to be confronting for yourself. So that right there is a great thing. Second, it requires that you get some mentorship, and that's a great thing. Third, it's going to really help you see the places where you could better hone your skills, your blade as a coach, as a leader. That's a good thing. And fourth, especially as you go from the PCC to the MCC designation, it's going to cause transformation in you, because at the highest level, most of the work is really about who you're being rather than what you're doing. So there's tremendous gifts to getting accredited. And I think that like more coaches would really benefit from taking it on rather than staying in their righteousness that accreditation's dumb or doesn't do anything or is all linear or whatever they've created to make it meaning something. So that's the good stuff. So I want to make sure before we go anywhere further, before you listen to what I'm going to say next as a justification for why you don't get accredited, I want to put those things into the space, and I really hold those true, and that's why I hold that accreditation. I think it matters. What I find is that when we're doing something like accrediting, when someone is modeling something like MCC coaching, there's a rigidity to it. And at this level of coaching, the rigidity I find is that there's sort of like, it's almost completely hands off with the client in some regards. And so what I was noticing last night was Annie was coaching this person, and my experience was that the person was saying like, I don't have any fear, I'm totally fine, blah, 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 blah. And I had an experience, I'm trying to find my way through here. I don't really want to reveal too much. I'm trying to share from my experience rather than anything about theirs. So what I found was that I had a different belief than what the client was speaking. And the trouble in these sort of situations is from a MCC, from an accreditation point of view, what is suggested is like, trust the client, trust the client, trust the client. So no matter what the client says, we trust them and then we go with that. It's sort of like improv, you know, great, I yes and everything you say. Great. However, I think that's going to be problematic in some situations. And those situations are where, I want my phone brighter so I can see, oh, it's maximum brightness. Damn. Look at the sun behind me. Is so. Nope, not really. No, we're stuck with this lighting. This is the best we're going to get. That's okay. We're going to work with it. I'm also going to throw my tripod on the ground like that, and I'm going to straighten it out. Straighten out, you. There we go. And there's me, and then I've got to get you right here. Okay, I got to adjust it. How are we doing? Okay, I think we're back. Thanks for hanging with me, guys. So imagine a situation. I'm just going to try to straighten myself out a bit here. There we go. Imagine a situation where someone has a blind spot. And in their blind spot is the idea that they would never, ever, ever be selfish. And part of the reason this is so like strong for them is because they hate the idea of selfishness. So you're listening to them, and what you notice is they're constantly justifying in their speaking how they're not selfish. Oh, I wouldn't do that because I really hate the idea of being selfish, and blah, 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 and blah, 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 blah. And so you start to pick up like, wow, this person's devoting a ton of energy to selfishness. They're certain, they're adamant that they're not, and yet I notice that there's a selfishness about how they're showing up. So this becomes a tricky place because the heart of transformation lies in the moments, the places where we are insistent that we are not doing something, and in fact, we are actually doing that very thing. That's where transformation is available. And transformation is elusive for that very same reason, that that's where it's available. It's elusive because the places where there's going to be the most transformation available are also the places where we're going to be certain I've got it handled there. That is not the issue. So I was working with someone not too long ago, and like their complaint was how unstable their life had become. And I was like, well, why don't you take on noticing the places where you actively create instability? And they're like, well, look, I can see that I know that I do it in little bits here and there, but like other than that, I've done a ton of work on this. It's all handled. And this was a situation where I was like, okay, I could trust this person. I could just say, okay, got it. I'm going to trust you here. But my intuition was like, but I'm feeling the distruth in that. I'm feeling that there's something different. And so I challenged him. I said, look, I notice how quickly you're rejecting that. And I notice that there's like this insistence on you, this sort of unwillingness even to consider what I'm putting forward. And so I'm going to invite you to get curious about that unwillingness, because that's a place where you're a little bit, don't fall over. That's a place where you're a little bit stuck. There's a little bit of a lack of freedom available for you because you're closed to considering this possibility. That's right, Tommy, about anger for you. Yeah, I remember that moment well. That was your distinguished being, I think. And so if we were rigidly following the rules of MCC coaching, this probably wouldn't be available. And yet I really hold those are the most powerful moments. And so I don't know, like, I'm finding my footing in this because I really want to encourage people to get accredited, and I really hold that there's value. But I also find that the coaches that are most transformational are the ones that don't stop there. And the coaches that are most transformational are the ones that don't then create these accreditation guidelines and stuff as like their Bible, as their gospel. And that there's actually like a level of this work beyond MCC. And so I was noticing as Annie was modeling MCC coaching, I was like, I don't want, like, what if she asked me, you know, to do something? And I was like, I don't think I want to, because I'm committed, at least in my opinion, to something greater than simply modeling those core competencies. And so I'm still finding my footing in that. I'm still kind of like, is it my own arrogance that I'm just not willing to fully trust that, like, if you fully trust someone, they will find that for themselves eventually? Maybe. Is it that I'm gun shy, like just shy about like owning what I see? Is it that I do see something here and, you know, whatever? And so I'm in the thick of that. I don't have a clear answer to that, but that's kind of that's what I see, Monica, as far as MCC coaching and stuff is concerned. And you'll notice, Monica's in the Forge with us, you'll notice we don't necessarily rigidly adhere to those accreditations, to those markers. America, what are you asking about when you say, have I tried it? I think you're asking, have I tried adhering, like trusting people that way? The answer is yes. Yeah. In order to get my accreditation, I had to for a lot of months. And someone's on their bike going by listening to Shoop by Salt and Pepper. So America, yes, I've tried it for many months with a mentor supporting me. So not just me, am I doing this? I think I'm doing it, but like getting calls reviewed, recording calls, having my mentor review them, practicing this way. And so it's not from a place of like, I'm not going to try it, I'm just not willing to trust it, fuck it, this is the way. This is from like, no, I have sat down, I have sat with this, I've practiced with this, and still here's where I find myself, here's where I end up. So I'm very committed to integrity in that regard, not to just dismissing something out of hand. So another example of that would be there was a period where, for whatever reason, 3 principles coaching and stuff was really big. It was really showing up in my space. And to me, I was like, I'm not sure if I fully understand this. It seems a little shallow to me while holding itself as incredibly deep. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying that's how it seemed to me. And but I was like, but I don't want to make that assessment without, like, just out of hand or without experiencing it. And so I went and hired three principals, one of the leaders in the three principals community, to work with me, to support me for I think a period of about 4 to 5 months. I could see the appeal, and I did not. It did not leave me feeling like this is something I really want more of, or this is the path. So so that's another example where, like, I'm really committed to not dismiss things out of hand, to really kind of stay the course and try this stuff out. Oh, this is the thing I want to adjust. Come on, phone. Straighten yourself out. America, you're saying what you say makes sense to me, and it's always confused me, but I thought it was just me. Okay, Monica, we've answered yours. Amy Carter. Hey, Amy, it's a long time. I first met Amy. I was one of the people training her in San Diego when she took her coach training. I miss San Diego. That was a fun city to train in. Amy says, how about why Friday Fun Day is key to our success as coaches? So the truth of coaching, hold on, this is really driving me nuts. I have to make an adjustment here. How's that? I think that's the key. Yeah, it's a bit better. The truth about coaching is that as a profession, our job as coaches is to live a beautiful life, a truly exquisite, beautiful life. And that doesn't mean that you join the masses and take photos of yourself in front of the Eiffel Tower in a lovely floral print dress, unless that's what a beautiful life means to you. A beautiful life can mean anything to anyone. It's entirely up to you to create that for yourself. This is part of a beautiful life for me, is that on a Friday during the morning, I get to go and hang out, chat, talk about cool shit in front of a gorgeous backdrop and just enjoy where I live and the sun and all of that sort of stuff. That's part of what a beautiful life is to me. What a lot of people are engaging in is they are, rather than create a beautiful life for themselves with the support of coaching, they're telling themselves a story. And the story is, before I can create, we're talking about how Friday Fun Day is key to success as coaches, Faison. We just finished talking about, actually I talked about yours a while back. So you missed it, it's all gone. So what the story people are telling themselves is, wow, got it, beautiful life. In order for me to have a beautiful life, and then they put something in front of it. So it's like, first I got to get some money, and then I'll hire a coach, and then I'll get some more clients, and then I'll hustle really hard. But then once I've hustled really hard, then I can have that extra bit of time on Friday, and I can take that month off, and then. And so rather than getting clear on the support, rather than getting supported so that they could create that beautiful life now, they put all of this stuff in front of it, and then they put creating the beautiful life at the end of it, and they put all their focus here. And because of that, they do one more thing. Because of the story that they start to manifest in their life and act in alignment with, the other thing they do is they start to try to project having a beautiful life while actually having that stuff in front of it, the stuff that they're putting before having a beautiful life. So you end up with this inherent disintegrity, this inherent lack of authenticity. And I know you've all felt it. It's probably why you enjoy these lives, if you enjoy these lives. Or it's because there's nothing else to do and it's a Friday and you kind of want to kick off at work. But it's that lack of integrity that we feel, and that the world feels in large part from the coaching profession, because there's a lot of projecting a beautiful life rather than actually living a beautiful life. And that projection will snare some people, sometimes a lot of people, especially if you're very good at it, but it has a half-life, which is why people in this kind of jam are really, hey Tony, are really, there's an urgency to them, and there's like a continual churn to them, and there's sort of like, got to get the next people, I got to get the next people. There's always the next thing that they're pushing and trying to create, is because of that half-life. People fall off because they become disillusioned. And the reason they become disillusioned is because what they're being presented with is a projection of a beautiful life rather than an experience of someone living a beautiful life. So, coming back to Amy's topic, why is Fun Day, Friday Fun Day key to our success as coaches, and I would even say as leaders? It's because That's because that's part of what is entailed in living a beautiful life. Not that it's on a Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific and that you're doing a live. It's that whatever your version of Friday Fun Day, whatever your version of a beautiful life is, that's essential to you being a leader and coach. Because when you create that in your life as something you are insistent upon, not an optional, not a after I do all this then, but as a right here, right now, this is my job, that has you then modeling leadership. It has you walking the walk rather than simply talking the talk. And then what happens is you become very magnetic because you become a person that's walking in the world living a beautiful life. And how couldn't that be magnetic? When we're around people that really love their lives, when we're around people that really love themselves, it's incredible to be around them. We're like, this person's cool. I want to spend more time with them. They seem to be able to laugh at themselves in ways that I don't seem to. They seem to take time off and still seem to be really abundant. I want to learn more about that. What's the deal? They seem to just have space for all members of all political parties or all whatever. How is it that you're able to do that? I get bent out of shape. I get super angry. So we become very magnetic as we do that. And that's the heart of leadership. So when we forgo this stuff, when we tell ourselves, I'll create it afterwards, I'll create that coach, I'll create that opportunity, I'll create that time off after I've got blah, 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 we're actually putting the cart before the horse. You have to do those things first. That's the key. The greatest disparity of this exists in the coaching profession. And the way it sounds is I've got to get some clients and then I'll hire a coach. And it just never, ever works that way. You've got to hire a coach and then you'll get some clients. That's always the way it goes. Okay, I just want to quickly, we had a few other questions. Oh yeah, here we go. Drew asks, what don't you present to your followers and why? Well, I resent the idea that I even have followers. I have cool people, friends, I guess some followers. What I don't present, so some of the things are I don't present stuff that is like extremely raw for me. And the measure for that is I don't usually present stuff that I don't have any capacity to distinguish about and that I'm right in the thick of. So like if something happened and there was like a breach in my relationship, or if like something happened to my father medically, I would, and I was like, oh my God, I'm scared, I'm worried about my dad, whatever, I would probably give myself some space before presenting that, before sharing that, because I want to honor my own tempo. I want to honor myself. I want to avoid kind of the ironic way we can avoid intimacy by like running and sharing straight away. This is one of the funny things about intimacy is like one way we can avoid intimacy is by holding everything close to our chest and not sharing anything. The other way is we can avoid intimacy by being a fire hose. I just constantly am sharing. It's sort of like hard. It allows me to not have to be with the impact of sharing any one thing. And so when there was something very raw, I would probably give myself a little bit of space before I shared. And sometimes, I've gotten better and better over the years of being able to discern this. Initially, I shared very little. And then I went over to the other side where I just shared constantly. And I've gotten better at sort of finding like, okay, I don't fully feel ready, but this doesn't feel completely raw. And that's usually the sweet spot when it's time to share, because that's when it's the most valuable. I don't have it all figured out yet, but I'm not just sort of bleeding all over the space. So that's the first thing. I also try to not share stuff that would have an impact on someone else. So there's stuff going on in my life that like involves Faye or might involve my parents or whatever. And I don't want to like kind of air their, it's not even necessarily their dirty laundry, but I'll use that phrase. I try not to air their dirty laundry because they haven't consented to that. And so I try to be cautious, and sometimes I'm good at this, sometimes I'm quite poor. And the reason that I'm quite poor, part of it is because, like I said, I used to never share anything. And so the swing to that is like, I'll share everything. And then I'm like, oh crap, that created a mess. Like that actually wasn't mine to share. And so I'm always learning. I'm becoming more proficient to that. I'm learning to calibrate where that line is for me and clean up the messes as I go. So that's another thing I don't share is usually when it's going to have an impact on someone else. Trying to see if there's anything else that I don't like present or share. I mean, there's lots of other stuff. I don't have it like categorized or in a particular class. So I'm usually trying to get a sense like, what's the class of stuff that I don't share? And I'd say those are the two biggest ones. And then I think there's a third category, which is like where I can't see any value in sharing it. And so like for that, like that can be a bit sticky. It can be a bit pernicious where it's sort of like sometimes, like for example, when I practice with Bay in the morning, sometimes the most valuable thing I can share is just like, I feel pathetic, or I feel like a loser, I feel impotent, or I feel powerless. And that really opens the moment for her. And so if I was sort of rigid about like, there's no value in me sharing this, like, I might not share that stuff. So that's one side of it. But there's like, the flip side to this is like, I don't share things like, I ate 6 bags of M&Ms today and I feel bad about it. Like it might be nice to hear that once in a while, and I'll share that once in a while. But there's a point where I'm like, I think this is mostly just me airing complaints at this point. And what I'm committed to is that what I share has some kind of value. And the value might be just that it provides access to more of me. It provides more vulnerability. It opens the moment up for all of us. It lets us feel our own humanity. But if I can't see anything along those lines, then I tend not to present that, not to share it. That's a great question, Drew. Thank you. We've got a couple more that we're going to touch on. So let's just refresh this page. Pow. So just for the record, someone asked, I got topics today because I said, can you help me out? I'm looking for some topics on today's live show. And people are just amazing, super generous. One person who I don't think I really know wrote, too bad there's nothing really going on in the world, huh? And my response was, perhaps you'd be willing to state your point or your request directly instead of through sarcasm. And I put a heart because I don't want to be too sharp with that, but I also want to kind of invite something a little bit more there. What I want to do is speak to that energy behind what he wrote. So the energy is sort of like, well, there's some sarcasm in it. And there's kind of like, I perceive a little bit of like, hey, dude, there's lots going on in the world. Why don't you just do your work? And if it's not like that, then it might just be like, well, why don't you just talk about some current events? And so there is something that I'll talk about there, which would be like conspiracy theories, stuff like that. But before we go down that path, I want to speak to like sarcasm like this. And it's not, my intention here isn't to vilify this person. It's totally fine how they showed up. But I want to use that as an example to help us see some of the impact that we probably aren't aware we're having, and to learn how to create better art. And creating good art is ultimately about like where the impact we have aligns with the intention we have. Another way you can think of this is like, if you're a musician, you can hear the song that you want to create in your head. That's your intention. And then there's the music that actually gets put onto paper or that gets created on your computer. That's the impact. And the better, the more masterful we become in our art, the more we can take whatever exists in our head and have it transmuted into the world and heard by the rest of the world, received by the rest of the world in a way that's aligned with that. So for those of us that relate to life as art, part of that would include our conversation and how we create interactions with other people. And creating better art would be like, okay, here's the intention I have. How best do I create that? So and Monica's saying social media comments, not the most brilliant medium for art, in my humble opinion. Agreed. But it's also why it's such a good place for us to look, because they're like so glaring sometimes. So this person wrote, too bad there's nothing really going on in the world, huh? So the first thing I'll share is like the impact of that is me feeling a bit defensive. And on the one hand, there's certainly a place for me to look like, what do I make it mean? Well, the first thing I make it mean is like, oh, I should have known better. I'm stupid. I'm dumb. And so it's important that I look on my side and acknowledge that truth and sort of like, yeah, that's going to be a knee jerk for me. Anytime someone makes me feel stupid, or anytime someone does something that I then interpret as meaning that they think I'm stupid, I'm going to have like a, all right, buddy, here it comes back at you tenfold. I'm going to come right over the top and push these chips into the center of the table. So I have to recognize that that truth is there for me. We don't want to step over that. And we could go deeper into that, but I want to set that aside now so we can look on the other side of the table. If you feel that I'm stepping over something, by all means, please share, and I'm more than happy to go into that. It's just that we're kind of looking with a specific intention here. So the other side of this is an invitation to people to consider, like, one, is that your intended impact? Is your intention that people feel a little taken aback, a little defensive, they might feel a little bit stupid, they might feel a little bit closed by your statement? And if this person is like, yeah, what I want to do is kind of make this person feel a little bit small, a little bit stupid, and like sort of invite them to consider, like, hey, instead of asking for help, why don't you just do your own work? And I want them not only to like consider that, but I want them to feel a little bit dumb about the way they even showed up. If that was this person's impact, fantastic. I might be curious why that would be their chosen impact, as opposed to like another impact that might be a little more artful would be something like, oh, I want to invite this person to consider places they may not be looking, and I want to do it in such a way that it opens them up rather than closes them down. We might say that might be a little bit more artful, but it's this person's option. So if this person, there's a funny moment happening right now that I want to pause. There's a guy walking just across the crosswalk here, talking to himself. And I was like, oh, there's someone talking to themselves. Interesting. And then I put my mind over there and imagine someone looking at me thinking, oh, there's a guy talking to himself. Interesting. So that's kind of funny. So it's an important question to look at, like, because both of those are options. Both of them, like, I can invite you to consider alternative approaches, new ways that you might not be aware of, and I can do it in such a way that you're left feeling like excited about that possibility, or I can do it in such a way that you feel closed and diminished and stupid for not thinking about that. And the question that I invite us all to be with is, which of those two places is more likely to have the person then reading that comment go and take that on in the future? And I would argue more likely is the one that opened them up to the possibility. Anytime we close people down, make them feel small or diminished, it's probably pretty unlikely that they're going to go forward. And you get to be your own judge on this. You get to say, well, what do I think would have me more likely in the future? I think when people make me feel stupid, I'm more likely to take action than when I feel opened up to a possibility. For me, I used to always sort of think that's what people need, is a kick in the ass. But I've come to realize that in the long run, and even the medium, and for the most part the short run, what really makes a difference for me is when people call me in as opposed to call me out. The second thing I want to speak to is, like, sarcasm is kind of this way for us to not really have to say the thing that we want to say. There's a sort of lack of intimacy and a protecting ourselves from vulnerability inherent in our sarcasm. Because in sarcasm, the point we really want to make is in the subtext. And the rest we kind of say. So there's like a layer, there's a buffer. Just like when we were talking about thinking what we feel, in sarcasm, my actual desire, the actual thing I want to say is hidden behind this buffer. And so it's all fine and good. Wherever you are is wherever you are, and you're practicing where you're practicing. But the opportunity for those of us that want to keep making better art is for us to actually practice the vulnerability in the moment that we want from the other people, from the world around us. And so if this was me, rather than saying, too bad there's nothing really going on in the world, huh? Just from a place of practicing, like, hey, how can I bring more intimacy in the moment? I might instead, if this was me writing this, I'd probably say, I'd love to hear your thoughts on current events going on in the world. And what's happening there is I'm directly expressing my desire. and I'm directly expressing it as a desire. I'm being very clear. I would love to hear your thoughts on, as opposed to just the sarcasm, the sort of batting away. And so sarcasm is a lot like a complaint. Typically behind every complaint is a request masquerading. There's a desire or a request that is masquerading as a complaint. I hate how it's always rainy in Victoria. There's a desire there. I want to move somewhere where it's sunny, or I want to be somewhere where it's not as rainy, or I want Victoria to change its weather, whatever it happens to be. I hate how you always wear backpacks. I have a request behind that. I want you to wear something different. I would like you to buy a briefcase. I mean, these things sound silly, but I'm using the silliness to give us like an easy to follow example. And sarcasm's the same way. Like behind sarcasm, there is usually a desire and or a request. It's just that we are protecting ourselves from the vulnerability that comes from directly asking for something. Because when we directly ask for something, someone said, "Hey, let's go." I'm like, what are we doing? When we directly ask for something, we expose ourselves to the possibility of someone saying no to us. And that's unsafe. It's much easier for us to just like, nope, not going to do that. I'm just going to be sarcastic, kind of ironically detached, whatever. If you don't like what I'm putting forward, who cares? You know, I'm kind of safe over here. So it's an invitation for you to practice. When you notice sarcasm showing up for you, ask yourself, like, what's the desire I have? What's the request in this moment? And see if you can practice with that. Okay. Last one for you guys today. And so this is from Michael Addis, a friend of mine who's what would you call him? I think he's like a producer in Hollywood. And let's see, I think I might have nope, that's a different post. He's asking, can you talk about growth versus fixed mindset? This is an interesting topic that I get kind of perennially, every 4 months or so. It's totally fine. But when people ask, they just say, talk about growth versus fixed mindset. And I find the trouble with that is that we already understand this pretty well. A growth mindset would be like, let's see, a fixed mindset would be, I don't like setting goals for myself because I feel bad when I don't achieve them. That's a fixed mindset because I've got a fixed story about goals and myself in relationship with those goals. And so from that mindset, my possibility set of options is limited because it does not include any possibility for me to do goals. It kind of has the possibility that's available to me is like, one, I can do goals and feel bad about myself constantly forever, or, sorry, middle finger, or I can not use goals and come up with something different. So that's actually a fixed mindset. It actually has me limited. It fixes my possibilities and limits what's available. Whereas a growth mindset might be something like, I currently have a relationship with goals that is disempowered, and I would like to change that relationship. That's a mindset that opens us up, that helps us grow. The trouble I find with talking about growth versus fixed mindset is that it's kind of like valuable, but it's also a bit simplistic. And the way we use it is kind of a bit simplistic because we just get to this point where we're like, I'm in a fixed mindset and I know I shouldn't be there and I know I should have a growth mindset, but I don't currently and I need to blah, 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 the end. And all that we really do with this distinction is we use it to berate ourselves, to make ourselves feel bad, to be kind of masochistic towards ourselves. And that just doesn't serve us. And so I'm really hopeful that anyone watching this can support me by telling me, like, what in particular about a growth versus a fixed mindset would you like to know? Is there something deeper we can get to aside from just talking about them generally? Because talking about them generally becomes, we end up in a conversation about the same platitudes we already know, right? Growth mindset promotes growth. Fixed mindset promotes you being fixed but safer. So after the fact, maybe you're watching this 5 days after and you're just like, growth versus fixed, man, I wonder what he's going to talk about. He didn't talk about anything. Please tell me, what would you like to know? What are the questions that you have? What are the things that you notice about this particular distinction? How do you work with it? And I find a growth versus fixed mindset, I guess I'll say this part, is that there's certain distinctions that are not that valuable because people just they're so common, they're so in the pop culture that that like they don't wake people up to anything. Like a distinction is most powerful when it kind of like stuns you into consciousness. And so an example of a distinction I find very powerful for that is the distinction, this is a Dusan Jukic distinction, which is the distinction of needing to know how to versus choosing to. And so he argues, his distinction is anytime you are caught telling yourself, I would do this, but I don't know how, he invites you to consider that actually the problem is you are simply not choosing to. It is never an issue of needing to know how. Once you choose to do something, you will figure out how to. Once you make a declaration, you will do what you have to do to learn how to do it. Needing to know how to is not the thing in your way. It is choosing to. I find that a much more powerful distinction for people because it calls them to the mat of their lives. It actually says, yo, no more effing around. Why am I abbreviating? No more fucking around. I don't have to abbreviate that. No more fucking around. Are you going to choose to do this or not? And it moves them forward. Whereas growth versus fixed mindset kind of, it's almost one of those distinctions that it allows us to just hold it in our head and then explore it mentally, and that does not usually have us do anything different. And so I find it can be a little bit lacking or toothless or missing somewhat in terms of the power that distinctions are actually there to provide us, which is move you forward into your life. Okay, well, y'all, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for chilling with me on a Friday morning down here by this beautiful scenic ocean view. One of the things I'm going to share something that is like, this is something totally undistinguished. It's something new for me. It's something I'm noodling on, inspired by a client of mine who just did a beautiful, beautiful client intensive for her people. And one of the things I've been noticing is that 2 months in my practice a year, I take December and June off. It's starting to not be enough. The amount of work that I'm up to, the amount of things that I'm holding, I'm finding like a dip in my energy is happening sooner and sooner as we get to those months. And it's taking me a bit longer and longer to like rejuvenate in those months. And so one of the things I'm considering in my practice is creating a third month off. So I'd have a month off every, I guess we'd call it a period, when you divide things into 3. But what I would do is extend. So I currently work with my clients for 12 months, and those months off don't count. So we actually are kind of like in agreement with each other for 14 months because 2 of the months are off. So this would extend further. It'd be 15 months, just not during those months. So that's one thing I would do. I'd have a greater duration that's working with my clients, and those months off are really about integration for the client. They're an opportunity to take the medicine they've got with me and the medicine I've provided them, and for both of us to integrate over the course of a month, to really let that settle, to notice what shows up, to notice what we revert to when we take away the continual ongoing support, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the first part of what I've been kind of toying with. This isn't happening. This isn't like, it's kind of edgy. Not edgy to share because I'm not doing anything yet, but edgy just for me to like hold as a possibility for me. And then the second thing is during one of those months, I'd like to run an intensive. And the idea that I have, and again, this is way out in there, like I wanted to run an intensive again for a while. And I want to run it in Europe because I fucking love Europe. And so the idea would be an intensive that my clients and Bay's clients are invited to for free. There's no cost to them. It runs over the course of like maybe 4 days. There's a 1 day at the start that's just for my clients and Bay's clients. And then we open the rest of the time up to the public. And they can come. If you want to be a part of that, you pay whatever the cost is, probably something like $2,000-$3,000, I don't know. Get to come, hang out, we do group work, we have fun together, sort of like a mini retreat, except we're not covering like hotel and food. That's all outside of the container. And that would be a way to sort of like, even though my clients have 1 more month that they're integrating in, I'm also providing added value. And so, I mean, there's added value just in another month of integrating, but they might not see it that way. And so I think that would be like a really cool opportunity for me, for my clients, for those of you that are like, I'm not up for that kind of commitment to work together, but I really like to have a deeper relationship, that might be a way to create something, get a taste of my work actually when you're in it as opposed to hearing about it. So that's an idea I'm noodling on, and like I'll share as I share about that. Like one of the concerns I have is that this may just be one more thing that doesn't happen. That I talk about it and it doesn't come to reality, and that's part of the nature. That's part of the risk we put ourselves into when we share publicly about this stuff. But I think that's as important that I share it, and the opportunity here for me is to confront that fear, because so what if that's what happens? All that really is happening is I'm putting something out there, I'm sharing that it's not a fully formed idea, and then I have a story about what it means if I don't actually bring it to fruition. And that's okay. I can work on that story. I can change that story so that I can start to share more freely about the stuff that I'm considering, that I'm working on. I can share all parts of my process. So that's something to just like tell me you think is awesome, as Monica and Seth are kind of doing. Thank you both. That encourages me to like make something like that happen. I really, really love the power of in-person work, and I really, really, really love getting to do larger group work, and I really, really, really love bringing my clients together and working with them, because the people I work with are incredible, and it's so cool when they get to spend time together, and when you get to be a part of that, and like we get to create like more of a community. So it's a vision I've had for a long time. It kind of got put on hold during COVID. Bay and I were running intensives here in Victoria, which was amazing. But I think I'd really like to do something in England or in Europe. I just really want to go to Europe again. So these are all thoughts that are there. So I'll keep you all in the loop as that evolves, and I hope you guys have an amazing weekend. Monica, thank you. I appreciate that. Have an incredible weekend. I hope your weather looks as beautiful as it does here in beautiful Victoria. Come to Victoria, spend time in this incredible scenery, this beautiful healing ocean that we get to live by, and have an awesome weekend. Peace, y'all.